Grady Larkin had been late for exactly 9 minutes when he walked into Willow Creek Elementary holding Poppy's forgotten lunch bag. And even now, standing in the doorway of Ms. Bell's third-grade classroom, he couldn't say what stopped him from just handing it to the front desk aide like he usually did. Later, he'd tell himself it was because the door happened to be open. That was true. What was also true was that the second he heard his daughter's voice, bright, certain, carrying the particular confidence of a 7-year-old who believes every word she says is fact, his feet simply stopped moving. "That's her," Poppy said, pointing across the room. "That's the woman my dad talks about every night." The class was doing show and tell, and today's theme, according to the banner above the whiteboard, was "My Favorite Person." A dozen kids had already stood up to talk about grandmothers, dogs, and one unforgettable soccer coach. Poppy hadn't brought a photo of Naomi Farrow at all, just a photo of a school hallway, snapped on Grady's phone one afternoon when he'd come to pick her up early. Naomi happened to be in the frame, a stack of folders under one arm, laughing at something the school secretary had said. Naomi's pen went still against her clipboard. She'd only been in the room for a routine check-in, sitting quietly near the back while Ms. Bell ran the lesson. She was not supposed to be the topic of anyone's presentation, favorite person or otherwise. "Poppy," Grady started, and immediately regretted how loud his voice sounded in a room full of picture books and half-eaten goldfish crackers. Poppy turned, saw him in the doorway, and her face did the thing it always did when she thought she'd pleased him, opened up entirely, delighted with herself. "I told them, Dad," she said, the way a kid announces returning an overdue library book on time. Every child in the room turned to look at him. Ms. Bell's expression sat somewhere between amusement and alarm, and Naomi looked at him the way a person looks at someone they've just watched step into traffic, careful, bracing. Nobody spoke for a beat that felt considerably longer than a beat. "I'm so sorry," Grady finally managed, to the room in general, to Ms. Bell specifically, to Naomi most of all, though he couldn't quite make himself look at her while he said it. "She left her lunch. I didn't mean to." He lifted the paper bag like it might explain any part of what had just happened. Ms. Bell recovered first, the way good teachers do, clapping once and calling on Marcus, who wanted to talk about his golden retriever. The moment dissolved the way classroom moments do, fast, already forgotten by the kids. But Grady stood in that doorway a beat too long, and so did Naomi, and the space between them held something neither of them had said out loud, not even to themselves. He set the lunch bag on the shelf, mouthed a thank you to Ms. Bell, and left before Poppy could say anything else that was, technically, true. He didn't see Naomi again until pickup. She was waiting by the flagpole when he came around the corner, not her usual spot by the office doors, and he understood right away this wasn't a coincidence. Naomi Farrow didn't do coincidences. In the 4 months since she'd started working with Poppy, twice-weekly sessions that began about the accident and had gradually widened into smaller things, sleep, friendships, the particular fear Poppy carried about forgetting her mother's voice, Grady had learned she was a woman who planned things. "Hi," she said, and it came out more careful than either of them wanted. "Hi." He shifted his weight, glancing toward the doors where Poppy would come running any second. "I don't know where she got that. The lunch thing. She takes pictures. On my phone. She takes a lot of pictures. Grady." Naomi's voice was gentle but firm, the tone she probably used to walk grieving 8-year-olds back from a bad afternoon. "You don't have to explain a photograph to me. I feel like I do." "You don't." She looked past him, toward the parking lot, toward anywhere that wasn't his face. "But we should probably talk. Not right now, not here. Just soon." The word landed harder than it should have. Grady had spent 14 months learning to live inside small, manageable sentences, the kind that didn't ask anything of him he couldn't deliver. Soon was not one of those sentences. It had weight, the particular weight of a conversation neither of them was ready for, but both now knew was coming. Poppy came barreling out the doors before he could answer, backpack half-zipped, already narrating Marcus's dog story. Naomi's whole posture shifted the second she saw her, softened, warmed, became the person Poppy trusted with the hardest parts of her small, complicated grief. She crouched to Poppy's height and listened like it was the only story worth hearing. Grady watched them together and felt the thing he felt most nights now, lying awake after Poppy had finally gone quiet down the hall. A feeling he hadn't given a name to yet, because naming it felt like admitting something he wasn't sure he'd earned the right to feel. The rundown had started as a way to get Poppy to fall asleep without a fight. Every night since the accident, Grady sat on the edge of her bed and they traded the small facts of their day. What she'd eaten for lunch, what he'd built or torn out on a job site, which kid had been mean at recess, which client had been mean about a quote. It was a habit born out of desperation more than parenting wisdom. Poppy used to wake at 2 a.m., asking questions about her mother that Grady didn't have good answers for, and somewhere along the way, narrating the ordinary parts of the day out loud had become the thing that let her sleep through the night instead. He hadn't noticed how often Naomi's name showed up in his half of the rundown until it was too late to unnotice it. She listened to me today. She thought the mural idea for the counseling room was good. She said you were doing better with the sleep stuff. Small sentences offered the way he might mention the weather. He hadn't meant anything by them, or told himself he hadn't, but Poppy, sharp, literal, unrelentingly observant, had apparently been keeping a tally the way kids do, cataloging which name got repeated, and drawing the only conclusion a 7-year-old brain finds available. Principal Dana Whitfield called Naomi into her office the following Tuesday. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Whitfield said, which was the kind of sentence that meant an accusation was coming regardless. But a parent overheard the classroom exchange and mentioned it to another parent, who mentioned it to me. "I have to ask directly, is there a personal relationship between you and Mr. Larkin?" "No," Naomi said, and it was true, in the narrow, technical sense that mattered least. "We talk at pickup, that's the extent of it. You understand how it looks. You're providing grief counseling to his daughter. If there's any appearance of a personal entanglement with the parent, that's a conflict of interest I have to document, for Poppy's case file and for yours." Naomi understood exactly how it looked, because she'd spent the last 4 months trying not to look at it too closely herself. She thought about Grady Larkin more than she wanted to admit, to a woman whose job depended on professional boundaries. The way he showed up 10 minutes early to every pickup, like he couldn't stand making Poppy wait. The way he'd once teared up mid-sentence, describing his late wife's laugh, and then apologized for it, as though grief were an interruption rather than the whole point. She had a file open on her desk with careful clinical notes about Poppy's progress, and increasingly, none of them mentioned how much of that progress seemed to trace back to the fact that her father had someone steady to talk to at the end of the day, even if that someone was, technically, off-limits. "I'll have a formal recommendation by Friday," Naomi told Whitfield. "Either we continue the sessions as they are, or I request a transfer of the case to Dr. Okafor. That would end your involvement with Poppy entirely." "I know." She found Grady at his truck that evening, later than she meant to stay. He looked up from loading a toolbox into the bed, and something in his face braced instantly, the way it had at the flagpole. "They pulled you in," he said. It wasn't a question. A parent complained, not about anything real, about optics. Naomi crossed her arms against the evening cold. "I have until Friday to recommend whether I stay on Poppy's case." "That's insane. You've done more for her in 4 months than—" He stopped himself, jaw tight. "This is my fault. The photo, the classroom thing. I should have been more careful." "You didn't do anything, Grady. Neither did I." Her voice wavered, just slightly, on the second half of that sentence, and they both heard it. That's what makes this so complicated. If we'd actually done something wrong, there'd at least be a clear rule to point to. He set the toolbox down harder than necessary. So what happens if you recommend the transfer? Then I stop seeing Poppy. Someone else takes over her file, and none of this ever gets easier for anyone. Least of all her. Naomi looked at him directly, for the first time since the classroom. And if I recommend staying on, I have to write, in an official document, that there's nothing here worth flagging. Which means, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. They both understood that whichever box she checked on Friday would be, in its own quiet, bureaucratic way, a decision about more than a counseling assignment. "I don't want you to lose your job over my daughter's show and tell," Grady said finally. "And I don't want to be the reason Poppy loses the one person who's helped her say her mother's name without flinching." Naomi pulled her coat tighter. "So we have 4 days to figure out what's actually true here, Grady. Not what it looks like. What's true." Grady didn't wait for Friday. On Wednesday morning, he called Principal Whitfield's office and asked for the meeting himself. Not Naomi's recommendation, not a parent's second-hand complaint, but a direct conversation with the people who'd be deciding his daughter's care. Whitfield sounded surprised. Nobody requested to sit in on these reviews voluntarily. He showed up in his work jacket because he hadn't had time to change. Sawdust still ghosted into the seams of it, and sat across from Whitfield and a district counselor named Reeves, who'd been brought in to observe. Naomi sat one chair down, spine straight, folder unopened in her lap. "I want to say this plainly," Grady started, "because I think everyone in this room is being careful not to, and it's making things worse than they need to be. Ms. Farrow has never done anything unprofessional. Not once. If there's a version of this where somebody gets blamed, it should be me. I'm the one who let a photograph sit on my phone. I'm the one who talks about my day out loud to a 7-year-old without editing myself first. None of that is on her." "Mr. Larkin, this isn't about assigning blame," Reeves began. "Maybe not officially, but somebody's job is on the table, and it isn't mine." Grady looked at Whitfield directly. "So here's what I'm asking. Keep Naomi on Poppy's case. She's the only reason my daughter sleeps through the night anymore. If you need a condition attached to that, different pickup arrangements, another staff member present, whatever paperwork makes this defensible, I'll agree to it. And if the concern is that something's going on between us that shouldn't be, then let the record show I'm telling you, formally, that I won't pursue anything with Ms. Farrow while she's treating my daughter. That's not a hard line for me to hold. Poppy's care matters more than whatever this is." He didn't look at Naomi when he said it, because he wasn't sure he could get through the sentence if he did. The room was quiet for a moment. Whitfield glanced at Reeves, some silent administrative calculation passing between them, and then back at Naomi. "Ms. Farrow, your recommendation?" Naomi opened the folder she'd been holding, though she didn't need to read from it. "I recommend continuing Poppy's sessions with me, with a documented boundary in place. No unsupervised contact with Mr. Larkin outside scheduled pickups. Quarterly review by Dr. Okafor as a second set of eyes. I think ending Poppy's case now would set her progress back further than any perceived conflict of interest justifies." She closed the folder, "And I agree with Mr. Larkin's terms." It wasn't a dramatic ending. Nobody clapped. Whitfield made a note, said she'd finalize the paperwork by the end of the week, and the meeting broke up the way school meetings do. Briskly, without ceremony, everyone already thinking about the next thing on their calendar. Grady walked out to the parking lot and found Naomi waiting by his truck for the second time in a week, except this time, neither of them looked braced for bad news. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "The whole falling on the sword thing. I wanted to, it was true." He leaned against the tailgate. "Doesn't mean it didn't cost me something, saying it out loud in front of Whitfield like that." "What did it cost you?" He thought about it honestly, the way he'd been trying to think about most things since Callie. Getting to find out what this actually is. "Whatever it is, I put that on hold for as long as Poppy needs you in that office chair across from her. And I meant it. I just didn't expect it to feel like giving something up before I even had it." Naomi was quiet for a moment, watching a group of kids get loaded into a minivan across the lot. "For what it's worth," she said, "Dr. Okafor thinks Poppy's close to a natural stopping point. 6 more sessions, maybe 8. Kids don't need forever with someone like me. They need enough. And then they need their life back." She looked at him. "So this isn't on hold forever, Grady. It's on hold for a season." He didn't answer right away, but something in his shoulders came down from where they'd been sitting for 14 months. 8 sessions later, on a Thursday afternoon in early spring, Poppy skipped out of Naomi's office for the last time, backpack bouncing, and announced to the hallway at large that she'd graduated. Like counseling was a diploma program with a ceremony and a gown. Naomi walked her out to the pickup line herself, and when she saw Grady leaning against his truck instead of waiting in the car line like everyone else, she didn't stop walking toward him. "Officially off the case as of 30 seconds ago," she said. "I heard." "So?" She stopped in front of him, hands in her coat pockets, something easier in her face than he'd seen there in months. "Was there ever going to be a version of this where you asked me to dinner, or was I supposed to bring it up myself eventually?" Poppy, 3 feet away, and pretending not to listen, grinned down at her shoes. Grady laughed. A real one. The kind that had gotten rarer since Callie. The kind Poppy still perked up at every time she heard it. And said he'd been working on the question for about 4 months now, and figured he'd finally gotten the timing right. They walked to the truck together, Poppy skipping ahead between them, already narrating something new for tonight's rundown, and for the first time in a long time, Grady wasn't rehearsing what he'd leave out.